tyrant. Most men simply lacked the strength to rule beside her. At 34 years old, Amara Okonjo was a household name in the halls of global wealth. She was an absolute force of nature, a Nigerian tech mogul, billionaire founder of Apex Global, and an undisputed titan who had modernized supply chains across Africa, Europe, and Asia. She was drop-dead gorgeous, fiercely intelligent, and possessed an aura so sharp it could cut glass. Yet for 6 long, completely dry years, Amara had been aggressively, undeniably single. It wasn't because she was hard to look at. It was because she refused to apologize for her size. Her exes were a tragic museum of insecure men. One tried to secretly alter her company's shares to feel like the man of the house, while another complained that her private jet made him look small in front of his friends. Their favorite parting insult was always the same: "You're just too much, Amara." Eventually, Amara learned her lesson. She folded her heart, packed away her soft side, and locked the door. She decided that if being an unapologetic, ultra-successful African woman meant she was too much, then the world simply needed to get bigger eyes. She didn't need a man to complete her. Her bank account had commas. Her posture was impeccable. And her life was entirely peaceful without male fragile egos ruining her day. The private gala at Lake Geneva was an exercise in extreme, sickening wealth. The air smelled of vintage champagne, heavy silk, and quiet corporate greed. Amara stepped into the room looking like absolute royalty. She wore an exquisite, custom, emerald green satin gown that hugged her curves effortlessly, paired with an intricate, tall crown of flawless micro braids that added 3 inches to her already commanding height. She looked stunning. And she was bored to death. Knowing the routine of these events, Amara immediately dodged the hovering gaze of desperate bachelors, tech brothers, and European lords looking for an heiress. "Not tonight," she murmured to herself, taking a glass of chilled Dom Perignon from a passing waiter's tray. She retreated to the farthest, quietest corner of the Venua raised lounge area by the floor-to-ceiling glass balconies overlooking the lake. She leaned back against a plush velvet sofa, crossed her long legs, took a slow sip of her wine, and proceeded to mind her own absolute business, quietly enjoying the view and watching the upper-crust crowd make fools of themselves. She didn't come to hunt. She came to observe. 10 minutes into the party, the temperature in the main hall dropped 5 degrees. The heavy oak double doors swung open and the hum of conversation glitched. Security guards straightened their backs. High-ranking diplomats quietly cleared a path. Walking into the room was Kung Ji-hoon. To the world, Ji-hoon was the low-profile, insanely powerful chairman of GMCong Logistics, a South Korean shipping giant. To the underground, he was the terrifying, brilliant head of the GMCong syndicate, the Korean mafia boss whose word was law from Seoul to Hamburg. He was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a razor-sharp, bespoke charcoal suit, carrying an aura of quiet, deadly authority. At first, Ji-hoon didn't notice a thing. He was flanked by his stone-faced right-hand man, Min-jun. Ji-hoon accepted a crystal tumbler of scotch from a server, exchanged 2 polite, icy nods with the German ambassador, and engaged in a brief, dry conversation about shipping routes. He was fully prepared to leave within 20 minutes. It happened while he was listening to an Italian billionaire drone on about real estate. Ji-hoon's sharp, trained eyes, constantly scanning the room out of sheer survival instinct, cut across the floor to the dimly lit balcony corner. And then his gaze locked. Amara was sitting on the dark velvet sofa, her chin resting on her hand, casually watching the room with a look of pure, unbothered superiority. The dim chandelier light hit the deep chocolate of her skin and the brilliant green of her gown like a masterpiece hanging in an empty museum. Jihoon stopped mid-sentence. He actually froze. Boss? Minjun whispered in low Korean, sensing the sudden pause. Is there a threat? No, Jihoon replied, his dark eyes fixed entirely on the corner. A slow, incredibly dangerous, intriguing smirk pulled at the edge of his lips. Not a threat, a masterpiece. He watched her for 2 full minutes. He saw 3 different men approach her corner. He saw her dismantle each one with nothing more than an arched eyebrow and a single, icy sentence until they practically retreated backward. She wasn't seeking attention. She wasn't looking around for approval. She was complete all by herself. Amara felt his eyes long before he moved. Through the reflection of the glass balcony, she saw the tall, ridiculously handsome Korean man staring at her. Her heart gave a sudden, traitorous, violent thud. He was, down to the last sharp line of his jawline, exactly her type. Lethal, commanding, effortlessly sharp, and completely unfazed by the room. Every romantic instinct screamed at her to glance back and flash him an inviting smile. Her pride immediately slammed the brakes. Absolutely not, Amara thought, lifting her glass with icy composure and turning her gaze back to the lake. I don't care if he looks like he was sculpted by angels and funded by a sovereign state. If he wants my time, he is coming to get it. I am not taking a single step. Across the room, Ji-hoon saw the subtle tilt of her head in the glass reflection. He realized instantly, she knows I'm looking, and she's waiting. He found it wildly entertaining. Without breaking eye contact with her reflection, Ji-hoon handed his glass to Min-jun, adjusted his cuffs, and began his deliberate, unhurried walk across the ballroom floor. People tried to step in his path to talk to him. He bypassed them like ghost smoke, his eyes set entirely on the corner. He stopped 2 steps away from her lounge area. Up close, her presence was intoxicating, a mix of expensive oud, sweet vanilla, and pure authority. Amara took her time. She finished her sip, slowly lowered her glass, turned her head, and looked up at him. She didn't smile. She just raised one dark eyebrow. You're sitting in the quietest spot in Geneva, Ji-hoon said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated right down her spine. Are you hiding? Or are you just judging everyone? Amara leaned back into the velvet cushions, relaxed as a lioness. I don't hide, mister. Kung, he supplied smoothly. Ji-hoon, Mr. Kung, she continued, her Nigerian accent smooth, rich, and regal. And I'm not judging. Judging implies I care enough to form a verdict. I'm simply enjoying the entertainment. Ji-hoon let out a short, quiet laugh, a rare, genuine sound that made his eyes crinkle slightly at the edges, cutting through his terrifying aura. Entertainment? The men trying to speak to you looked like they were applying for a mortgage. They were, Amara replied dryly, a small, wicked smirk finally breaking her composure. And their credit score was terrible. Jihoon chuckled, taking a step closer, unbuttoning his suit jacket and placing one hand in his pocket. He didn't ask to sit. He stood there, fully taking up space, looking down at her not with condescension, but with absolute sharp admiration. I watched you send 3 executives running in under 5 minutes, Ji-hoon noted, his dark eyes sparkling. Most women in this room are working very hard to be approached. Amara tilted her head, her gaze locking onto his with unwavering confidence. I am not most women, Mr. Kang. And if a man needs an invitation to walk across a room, he probably can't handle what happens when he gets here. Ji-hoon's smile widened, a slow, dangerous, utterly mesmerized expression. He stepped directly into her personal space, leaning down slightly so his low voice was for her ears alone. A fair point, Ji-hoon murmured softly. Good thing I didn't ask for an invitation. Amara's breath caught for a fraction of a second, though her face remained an unreadable mask of cool elegance. Oh, she thought, her inner heart doing backflips, this one actually has backbone. You're very bold, she said coolly. I'm a businessman, Miss Okonjo. Amara Okonjo. Miss Okonjo, Ji-hoon repeated, testing her name on his tongue like a fine wine. I know a high-value asset when I see one. And I never leave a room without securing what catches my eye. Amara let out a light, melodious laugh, raising her glass toward him. I am an empire, Mr. King, not an asset to be acquired. Even better, Ji-hoon replied, his eyes burning with an unmistakable, dangerous warmth as he extended a hand toward her. I've spent my whole life building an empire. I think it's about time I met an equal. Ji-hoon's hand remained extended, his dark eyes locked onto hers with an unwavering, magnetic pull. A lesser woman would have melted right into his palm. Amara, however, was a master strategist. Her heart was thumping wildly against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her face remained a cool mask of African royalty. She looked down at his outstretched hand, then slowly brought her eyes back up to his, letting a faint, maddeningly charming smile touch her lips. An equal? Amara murmured softly, swirling the last drop of Dom Perignon in her glass. That sounds lovely, Mr. King, but, unfortunately, my schedule for the next 6 months is entirely booked with actual empires, not potential ones. Gi-hoon didn't pull his hand back. He simply tilted his head, his smirk deepening. 6 months? I'm sure a woman of your caliber can clear an hour for dinner tomorrow night. Tomorrow? Amara gasped with marked dramatic horror, placing a hand lightly over her chest. Oh dear. Tomorrow I have a very pressing, non-negotiable appointment. My cat has a virtual therapy session, and I have to supervise. Behind Ji-hoon, Min-chon's jaw twitched. Amara didn't even own a cat. Ji-hoon raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing wildly in his dark eyes. He knew a game when he was playing one, and he loved every second of it. A cat therapist, truly a world-class emergency. It's very serious, Mr. Kung, Amara said smoothly, standing up from the plush velvet sofa in one fluid, breathtaking motion. She towered in her heels, her emerald silk gown rustling softly. She set her empty glass on a nearby ledge and looked down at him with pure, playful arrogance. So, as enticing as dinner with a shadowy shipping tycoon sounds, I must decline. Good night, Ji-hoon. Without waiting for his reply, without giving him another second of her time, Amara turned on her heel and walked away. She didn't look back once, her braids swaying regally as she glided through the ballroom doors and vanished into the Geneva night. The moment the heavy glass doors of her private limousine slammed shut behind her, Amara collapsed back against the leather seat, put her hands over her face, and let out a long, uncharacteristic squeal. Amara, you absolute fool, she scolded herself, slapping her own forehead. A cat therapist? You don't even like cats. Why didn't you just take his number? She stared out the tinted window at the glowing city lights, her heartbeat still echoing loudly in her ears. He was the man. She knew it in her bones. But her stubborn pride had won again, and now she was terrified. She had just played her cards so hard, she'd played herself right out of the game. The next 3 weeks were absolute torture. Back in her high-rise corporate headquarters in Lagos, Amara was an executive nightmare. She ran Apex Global with terrifying efficiency, closing multi-million-dollar logistics contracts across North Africa, firing incompetent executives, and presiding over board meetings like a warrior queen. But behind closed doors in her penthouse office, she was losing her mind. Every time her personal phone buzzed, her heart jumped into her throat. Is it him? Did he find my number? Every time an unknown private jet landed at the airport, she secretly checked the registry. He's a Korean mafia boss, she muttered to herself one evening, pacing around her massive glass desk with a glass of red wine. If he really wanted me, he would have tracked me down by now. Men are all the same. One rejection and their fragile egos shatter. She was deeply disappointed. For 3 weeks, she convinced herself that she had made a massive mistake, that she was destined to be alone with her billions forever. She had no idea that Ji-hoon was simply letting the trap set itself. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Amara was in the middle of a high-stakes board presentation. 20 male directors were sitting around her mahogany table, arguing loudly over supply chain tariffs in East Africa. Amara was leaning back in her leather executive chair, resting her chin on her hand, looking entirely bored. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Her chief security officer, a 6'4" former military operative, was walking backward into the room, his hands up in a gesture of surrender. Behind him stepped 4 towering men in tailor-made charcoal suits, their postures stiff, dangerous, and carrying weapons beneath their coats that nobody dared ask about. The entire boardroom fell dead silent. The directors gasped, scrambling back in their chairs. And then, walking through the center of the armed escort, wearing an immaculate navy pinstripe suit with a dark silk tie, came Kang Ji-hoon. Amara's pen froze in her hand. Her heart did a violent, soaring backflip, but she instantly slammed her expression into a cool, dangerous glare. Ji-hoon walked straight down the center of the boardroom like he owned the building. He ignored the trembling directors entirely, stopping right at the head of the table where Amara sat. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. King?" Amara asked, her voice rich, steady, and dripping with authoritative silk. "You are interrupting a billion-dollar board meeting." Ji-hoon looked down at her, a slow, breathtakingly handsome smile spreading across his face. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, making her security guards flinch, and pulled out a single, exquisite black envelope sealed with gold wax. He laid it gently on the table in front of her. "I called your cat's therapist," Ji-hoon said, his deep baritone carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "She told me your schedule was clear tonight." A few board members blinked in complete confusion. Amara's lips twitched, a fierce, sudden warmth blooming in her chest. "I don't do impromptu meetings, Ji-hoon," she said smoothly, leaning back. "It's not a meeting, Miss Okonjo." "It's an official dinner," Ji-hoon replied, leaning down slightly, placing both hands on her desk, bringing his face dangerously close to hers. His dark eyes burned with absolute, undivided devotion. "I gave you 3 weeks to realize you couldn't get me out of your head. Now, you're coming with me." Amara looked at the gold-sealed envelope, then up into the eyes of a man who wasn't intimidated by her power, her security, or her status. He had flown across continents, bypassed elite security, and stormed her corporate stronghold just to take her to dinner. Slowly, Amara closed her leather folder, stood up, and looked at her bewildered board of directors. "Meeting adjourned," she said softly. She looked back at Ji-hoon, raising a single eyebrow. "You're paying for dinner, Mr. King." "I'm paying for everything," Queen Ji-hoon murmured softly. That dinner marked the beginning of a completely new reality for Amara. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to shrink herself. Ji-hoon didn't feel small when she talked about her wealth. He amplified it. When they sat in private high-end restaurants in Seoul, Paris, and Lagos, he listened to her talk business with genuine fascination. When she was tired, he protected her peace with a terrifying iron efficiency. He didn't want to conquer her kingdom. He wanted to stand guard at its gates. For 2 glorious months, Amara felt what it was like to be truly loved by a man whose presence was as vast as her own. She was no longer too much. With Ji-hoon, she was finally just enough. But a king of the underworld cannot keep a queen in the shadows forever. It happened on a crisp autumn evening in Tokyo, where Ji-hoon had taken Amara for a private celebration after Apex Global secured a massive port deal. They were leaving a high-end, discreet restaurant in the Ginza district, walking toward his armored Maybach under the light rain. Jae-hoon had his arm wrapped firmly around Amara's waist, whispering something in Korean that had her laughing. A rare, light, beautiful sound. Suddenly, Ji-hoon's body went completely rigid. Before Amara could ask what was wrong, Ji-hoon violently grabbed her by the back of her neck, slammed her down behind the door of the Maybach, and covered her body with his own. A deafening volley of automatic gunfire ripped through the quiet street, tearing into the asphalt where they had been standing a second ago. Screams echoed across the block. Min-jun and the security detail instantly drew suppressed weapons, returning fire with lethal, terrifying precision behind the cars. Jae-hoon didn't flinch. He remained pressed over Amara, his broad shoulders shielding her completely from the flying metal and glass. Slowly, Jae-hoon looked down at her. His warm, romantic eyes from seconds ago were completely gone. In their place was the cold, unyielding, psychotic gaze of the Jeomseong mafia bossa man who lived in blood. "Are you hit?" Ji-hoon demanded, his voice dangerously dark, checking her arms and face with fast, practiced hands. Amara, her heart pounding violently in her throat, looked up at him. She saw a trickle of blood running down his jaw, where a piece of flying glass had grazed him. "I'm fine," Amara breathed out, her instincts kicking into high gear. "Who are they?" Ji-hoon looked over his shoulder as Min-jun dropped an attacker in the alleyway. A dark, terrifying smirk played on his lips. "Rivals," Ji-hoon said softly, turning back to her and gently wiping a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch shockingly soft, despite the chaos around them. "They thought finding my weakness meant they found a gap to kill me." He leaned down, pressing a firm, intense kiss to her forehead, while bullets ricocheted off the armored vehicle frame above them. "They don't realize," Ji-hoon whispered into her skin, his dark eyes ablaze with lethal fury, "that I didn't bring home a weakness. I brought home a war." The gunfire in Ginza was only the opening shot. Within 48 hours, the war exploded across 3 continents. The BICO, a rival East Asian syndicate backed by corrupt international arms dealers, had made their move. Seeing Ji-hoon's sudden public devotion to Amara as a fatal structural weakness, they launched a ruthless, coordinated assault to tear his empire apart from the inside out. 3 of Ji-hoon's shipping hubs in Yokohama were bombed. 2 of his top lieutenants were ambushed in Busan. Ji-hoon immediately moved Amara to his most secure location, a private, heavily fortified estate high in the foggy mountains of Gangwon Province, South Korea. The compound was an impenetrable fortress built of reinforced concrete, bulletproof glass, and surrounded by dozens of heavily armed, loyal Jeomseong soldiers. Amara sat in the estate's massive control room, watching tactical, live feeds on wall-sized monitors. She wasn't cowering in a bedroom. She was an empire builder. She used her global logistics network at Apex Global to quietly track rival cargo ships and pinpoint the enemy's financial pipelines, feeding Ji-hoon critical intelligence. She wasn't a mobster. She was the brain behind the iron wall. It happened on a stormy midnight hour when the rain lashed against the mountain like thrown gravel. Boom. A thunderous explosion rocked the eastern perimeter wall, shaking the foundation of the estate. The security monitors flickered, suddenly going black one by one as thermal cameras picked up dozens of heavily armed Biko mercenaries breaching the compound under the cover of the storm. They breached the main gate. Minshun's voice barked over the tactical comms. All units fall back to the main house. Protect the chairman. Alarms blared in high-pitched red flashes across the hallways. Automatic gunfire erupted outside, deafening and relentless. In the master study, Ji-hoon stepped in front of Amara, pulling a heavy tactical rifle from a hidden wall safe. He racked the slide with a cold, terrifying precision. He looked at her, his eyes dark with a mixture of lethal fury and deep, agonizing worry. "Stay behind the safe room door, Amara," Ji-hoon commanded, his voice tight. "Once I clear the courtyard, Min-jun will get you to the chopper." Amara didn't move toward the safe room. She stood her ground in her silk robe, her dark eyes flashing with absolute, fearless resolve. "I am not hiding in a box while you fight outside, Ji-hoon," she said, her voice steady against the roar of gunshots echoing through the courtyard. "This isn't a board meeting, Amara. They came to wipe me out," Ji-hoon roared, stepping up to her, grabbing her shoulders firmly. His hands were shaking, not from fear of death, but from the horrifying thought of losing her. "If anything happens to you because of my world, I will burn everything I built to the ground." "Then don't let anything happen to us," she shot back fiercely, gripping his vest with equal strength. "Now go, finish it." Ji-hoon kicked open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the storm. What followed was a brutal, terrifying display of tactical dominance. Ji-hoon moved through the rain-soaked courtyard like a reaper in a suit. Joined by Min-jun and his inner guard, they bottlenecked the attackers near the stone fountains. Bullets tore through the downpour, shattering marble pillars and lighting up the black night with flashes of muzzle fire. Ji-hoon was relentless. A bullet grazed his shoulder, tearing through his jacket, but he didn't even flinch. He dropped 3 mercenaries advancing on the side entrance, moving with a cold, mechanical lethalness that showed why he ruled the underground. Within 20 grueling, blood-soaked minutes, the gunfire died down into a haunting silence, replaced only by the heavy pour of rain and the crackle of burning vehicle wreckage near the shattered gate. The siege was broken. The Beek-ho assault had failed. Ji-hoon dropped his empty magazine onto the wet cobblestones, breathing heavily, covered in rain, soot, and his own blood from the shoulder graze. He immediately turned and stormed back into the ruined grand foyer. "Amara," he shouted, his voice hoarse, his sharp eyes frantically searching the hall. Amara stepped out from the doorway. She saw the blood dripping down his arm, the torn clothes, and the sheer exhaustion etched into his handsome, hardened face. She didn't hesitate. She threw off her pride, her reserve, and her caution, sprinting across the marble floor and hurling herself into his arms. Ji-hoon caught her tightly, pulling her body flush against his chest, dropping his weapon to wrap both arms around her like a vice. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in her scent, his entire body trembling with pure relief. "You're crazy," Ji-hoon choked out, his voice raw, holding her like she was the only real thing in a crumbling world. "You should have run." Amara pulled back just enough to frame his sharp, rain-splattered jaw with both of her hands. She looked straight into his dark, bloodshot eyes, her expression fiercely intense and dripping with undeniable devotion. "Listen to me, Kang Ji-hoon," Amara said, her rich voice cutting through the ringing in his ears with absolute clarity. For 6 years, I thought I had to do everything alone. I thought I was too much for any man, and I swore I would never let anyone into my life again. But you showed up and proved me wrong. You showed me what it feels like to be loved without conditions, without fear, and without shrinking who I am. Tears welled in her eyes, mixing with the rain, but her voice never wavered. I am completely, madly in love with you, Amara confessed, her heart laid totally bare. And I am not going anywhere. Jaehoon froze, looking at her in stunned, breathtaking awe. I am not going to grab a gun and become a mafia boss, Amara continued, a soft, tearful smirk breaking through her intense face. I have a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire to run, and I like my clean hands. But I will use every dollar, every connection, every piece of global intelligence, and every ounce of my brain to guard your back. I am your equal. I am your partner. And I am standing by you as your wife through the blood, through the peace, and through whatever hell tries to come for us next. Jihoon looked at the African queen standing in his ruined, blood-stained hallway, unbroken, terrified for him yet fiercely brave, offering him a love that wasn't afraid of his darkness. A deep, emotional breath escaped his chest. Jihoon leaned in and kissed her with a fierce, possessive tenderness that silenced the lingering echoes of war around them. It was a seal, a covenant, and a promise. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, a rare, breathtakingly beautiful smile touched his blood-dusted lips. Then let the world try to break us, Jihoon whispered in Korean, his hand gently cupping her cheek. They are going to realize they didn't just attack a syndicate. They declared war on a king and his queen. 6 months after the siege in Gangwon province, the power balance of the international underground had shifted forever. The Biko syndicate was no longer a threat. Their financial networks had been systematically dismantled by Amara's global trade intelligence, while Jihoon's forces secured their remaining ports. The world learned a harsh, unforgettable lesson. Attacking Kang Jihoon was dangerous, but attacking Amara Okonjo was financial and physical suicide. On a breathtaking sunny afternoon in Victoria Island, Lagos, the ocean breeze carried the scent of fresh hibiscus and champagne. The private estate overlooking the Atlantic Ocean was closed off for the wedding of the century. It was an extraordinary fusion of two powerful worlds, high-ranking African dignitaries, tech CEOs, and royalty sat alongside stoic Korean executives and quietly formidable men in bespoke suits. Amara stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her suite, looking magnificent, in a custom, floor-length lace gown interwoven with rich gold threads, topped with an exquisite, traditional Nigerian gel that framed her face like a golden halo. Her reflection no longer showed a woman who felt she was too much for the world. It showed a woman who had found a love vast enough to hold her entire universe. Outside, under the glass canopy, Jihoon stood at the altar, looking razor-sharp in a black velvet tuxedo. His dark eyes softened the moment the heavy carved doors opened and Amara walked down the aisle toward him. When she reached his side, Jihoon took both of her hands in his, bringing them to his lips before looking straight into her eyes. I spent my whole life building walls and ruling in the dark, Jihoon said softly in English, his voice echoing with deep, unwavering emotion. I thought power meant standing alone at the top. But you walked into my life and showed me that true power is having a partner who isn't afraid to stand in the light with you. You are my home, Amara. Amara smiled, a tear glinting at the corner of her eye as she squeezed his hands tightly. And I spent years believing my ambition was a flaw, Amara replied, her voice rich and velvet. Until I met a man who didn't want to clip my wings, but built an empire just so we could fly higher together. I am yours, Ji-hoon, in peace, in war, and for the rest of our lives. As they were declared husband and wife, the applause erupted across the coastal terrace. Ji-hoon pulled her close, kissing his queen under the warm Lagos sun, a king of the underground and a titan of tech, bound together as absolute equals. That evening, standing on the private deck of their yacht, as it sailed into the calm sunset waters of the Atlantic, Amara leaned back against Ji-hoon's chest, his arms wrapped snugly around her waist, shielding her from the cool evening breeze. So, Amara murmured playfully, resting her head against his shoulder. Now that the war is won and the wedding is over. What's our next project, CEO Kang? Ji-hoon chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated against her back. He kissed the side of her neck, looking out at the endless horizon. Whatever you want it to be, Mrs. Kang, he murmured softly. The world is ours. Amara found a love that matched her strength instead of shrinking it, proving that the right person will never ask you to be less of who you are. If you were in Amara's shoes, would you have taken the leap of faith to trust a man from such a dangerous world, or would you have walked away to protect your peaceful empire? Drop your thoughts below, and let's discuss what you would have done. Some women are born to be loved softly, and some are built to be feared. But Amara? She was an entire empirant. Most men simply lacked the strength to rule beside her. At 34 years old, Amara Okonjo was a household name in the halls of global wealth. She was an absolute force of nature, a Nigerian tech mogul, billionaire founder of Apex Global, and an undisputed titan who had modernized supply chains across Africa, Europe, and Asia. She was drawn